Greetings, everybody! I am the Starving Martian, and this is Thought Bubbles, where I share my thoughts on some random comic yanked out of my collection. And today, we're looking at Amazing Spider-Man Origin of the Hobgoblin. The Hobgoblin is perhaps my second favorite Spider-Man villain of all time. In fact, I'm one of those rare people who prefer Hobgoblin to the Green Goblin. I think his costume's cooler. And I like the air of mystery he has about him, and I love the fact that with a Hobgoblin, you get all the Goblin with like half the drama. The drama associated with Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, and Harry Osborn, and whoever else puts on the Green Goblin mantle. Oh, my goodness. Pure soap opera material. You don't really get that with the Hobgoblin, and I appreciate that. So, this collection here collects the earliest stories featuring the Hobgoblin. It's over 235 pages long, written by Roger Stern, the creator of the Hobgoblin, illustrated by various illustrators, and it is a really, really nice collection. Again, if you're into Spider-Man, especially some of the early stuff, and, the 80s is about 20 years or so after the appearance of Spider-Man. So, considering that it's been like 30 years since then, you can still kind of call this the early stuff. But the first appearances of characters like the Hobgoblin here, seeing where it all began, always a treat. And first few issues actually are dedicated to a character named Belladonna. She's a mysterious lady who uses deadly gas to incapacitate her victims. And these issues are here for a reason. You get a little bit of a previously, so you can get caught up on what was happening in the issues immediately before this. And so these first few issues don't look like they have anything to do with the Hobgoblin. He hasn't even been introduced yet directly, but it will eventually tie in to the character. Now, interesting thing about the Hobgoblin, for years nobody knew his true identity. There was red herrings, there was misdirections, there was like 3 or 4 different people specifically named as the Hobgoblin, and but apparently Roger Stern, the creator, had in mind the entire time. He knew who the Hobgoblin was, but he wasn't telling anybody. He didn't tell any of his coworkers, and he ended up leaving Marvel before he got a chance to reveal who the Hobgoblin was, so it was left to other writers to come up with, other solutions. We're going to get back to that in a minute. So these first few issues here, they introduce a few characters. There's Belladonna, but they do introduce some characters, including the one who we will later find out becomes the Hobgoblin. I'm not going to tell you who he is, although if you read this previously thing, it will actually state it right there, because when this was published, the true identity of the Hobgoblin had been revealed in the comics, so it wasn't considered a spoiler any longer. But before long, you do get... Oh, there's the Prowler. I don't know if you remember him. But before long, you do get some actual Hobgoblin action going on. No, I swear, it's in here. Yeah, here we find the Green Goblin's lair being discovered by this 2-bit crook here. Spider-Man chases him into the sewers, but he gets away from Spidey and ends up locating one of the Green Goblin's secret stashes. And so he informs one of his employers about it. And this mysterious figure, who's never fully seen, takes command and updates all of the Green Goblin's material. And we get our first classic look at the Hobgoblin. And I love that face. I wish I could get my face to do that. I wish I could get that one eye just to bulge like that. If you guys ever watched the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s, you'll know Mark Hamill, best known as Luke Skywalker, and the Joker, the voice of the Joker, did the voice of the Hobgoblin in that show, and he did a really good job. And so, anyway, if you know the character from that, you'll enjoy these comics as well. And so there's, you get to see Spidey's earliest interactions with old Hobby here. And there's other characters as well. Here's Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat. We get to catch up with her, see how she's doing. There's Mary Jane. Peter and MJ are kind of on the splits at this point in comic book history, which is why he's free to smooch with Black Cat. And even in this volume, you already see some misdirection, some people set up, framed to be the Hobgoblin. And then the true Hobgoblin emerges later, seemingly from the grave. It's also got Kingpin. And some hilarious 80s wear on Peter Parker. And on a lot of people, but it's always amusing seeing, you know, what used to be considered fashionable. Wondering what today's comics are going to look like, you know, 30 years from now. Ah, he knocked his block off. Look at that. And here's a really nasty cover of a previous collection of The Origin of the Hobgoblin, which probably contained less issues. These comics are nice. They do print some previous covers and some extra artwork, which is always fun. So if you enjoy the Hobgoblin, if he's a character you like, if you just like Spider-Man, the classic days, you know what? I like the previous eras of Spider-Man. I like when there was only one Spider-Man, when there weren't like you know, different versions and Spider-Gwens and you know, Ultimate Spider-Mans all running around in the same universe. I did like the Clone Saga. I am weird like that, but for the most part, I'll take just Peter Parker. But so that's The Origin of the Hobgoblin. Now, if you read and if you enjoy this book, and I imagine if you're a Spider-Man fan you would, there's a couple of follow-up books to this that you really, really ought to look into. One of them doesn't look like it is, but just trust me on this. Spider-Man, Birth of Venom. Okay, here's the guy who's pretty much ruled the late 80s throughout the 90s and has become quite popular again. In fact, as of this recording, his movie is just being released. Who knows if that'll be any good or not, but I'm holding out some hope. So how is this a follow-up? Well, the Origin of the Hobgoblin. Let's see if we can get right down to the last page here. The last issue in here ends with Spider-Man finding this mysterious ship in Central Park and hopping aboard and being transported out of town, out of planet, and to the Secret Wars. And of course, Secret Wars is where Spidey first encounters his infamous alien symbiote. So this picks up with that issue of the Secret Wars, where you see how Spider-Man gets his black costume and leads to his return to Central Park, exactly where he left, now wearing spiffy new duds. And it's pretty cool because if you read the Origin of the Hobgoblin, there's going to be plot threads that this book actually picks up. Now, I read this one first, and so it's kind of neat going back and reading this one and saying, oh, that's where that came from. There's even a moment here where Spidey goes to retrieve his clothing that he left webbed up in the trees, and he finds a bird has built a nest in it. And you actually see the moment in here where he's like, oh, just leave my clothes here, they'll be fine. And I'm reading that and thinking, see how well that works out for you, Spidey. So yeah, definitely read this. And then go ahead and read Birth of Venom, which covers a lot of material from the 80s through the 90s. Getting into some of the early Todd McFarlane art style. There we go. And so there's those two, and the next one you'll definitely also want to pick up is Spider-Man Hobgoblin Lives. This is another collected issue. This is more recent comics from like the late 90s. So I say more recent, that's just, you know, in perspective. But this collects a 3-part miniseries. Roger Stern came back to Marvel and wrote this miniseries where he finally set the record straight and tells you once and for all who the Green Goblin, not the Green Goblin, we know him, who the Hobgoblin actually is. And so the miniseries, they'll catch you up on all the goblins of the past, and bring you up to who the actual factual Hobgoblin is. And this particular edition of Hobgoblin Lives also includes a 3-part Amazing Spider-Man story involving, as you can tell from the cover, a meeting of the Hobgoblin and the Green Goblin, the first time that the actual Hobgoblin and the actual Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, ever met. So it's a bit of a team-up, a bit of a fallout, and, you know, pretty much what you would expect when two supervillains get together. Nice thing about this volume is at the very end, it includes a complete Spider-Man Hobgoblin timeline as compiled by Roger Stern, so you can fit all the puzzle pieces together. It's very, very handy. You'll have to trust me on that. It tells you which issues, what things happened in, and then there's an afterword by Roger Stern where he talks about how he created the Hobgoblin, how he knew who he was the whole time, yada yada. And so the full backstory on who the Hobgoblin is and how he came to be is found in this. So these 3 volumes here, Birth of Venom, Hobgoblin Lives, and Origin of the Hobgoblin, they tie together very, very nicely. And I would highly recommend picking all of them up. I don't think any one of them are very expensive these days, especially the 2 Hobgoblin books. I recommend checking Amazon, probably your best bet. So guys, this has been the Starving Martian, just taking a quick look at the origin of the Hobgoblin. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments below who your favorite Spider-Man villain is, and which is your favorite Goblin, Hob or Green. And we'll catch up with you next time. Until then, as always, keep watching the skies because it's full of Goblin gliders these days, apparently. Later, guys.